Right now, Putin is throwing everything at Moldova. The Kremlin wants to swallow the country. Urgent. Attack on Nato. A Russian drone spotted in Lithuania. The Ukrainian Armed Forces have torn Russia apart. The fire is visible from space. Ukrainian defenders will reach the enemy anywhere. Breaking! The front is paralyzed. Starlink is down and has the enemy really broken through to Pokrovsk? All this and more in our program Hotspot. Urgent! Putin is throwing all his forces at Moldova. The Kremlin wants to seize power. This is just hell! The Kremlin's schemes know no bounds. Putin is trying to interfere in Moldova's parliamentary elections to bring the country's legislative power under his control. He spares nothing. The Kremlin will carry out a bloody purge. For more details about all the horrors the Kremlin is planning, watch our report.
Russia, as always, tries to impose its own rules in someone else's house. The Kremlin is preparing large-scale interference in Moldova's parliamentary elections.
Unlike the West, we don't meddle in other people's affairs.
The parliamentary elections in Moldova will take place on September 28th. And already now, according to President Maia Sandu, the Kremlin is not just interfering but is preparing an unprecedented campaign to undermine the country's sovereignty and democratic institutions.
The Russian Federation wants to control Moldova from the fall. The Republic of Moldova, the Federation.
Russia wants to control Moldova from the fall, the Republic of Moldova. Russia intends to control Moldova starting this fall and is preparing unprecedented interference in the September elections. The risk to public order and national security are significant, and all institutions, as well as society as a whole, must be aware of the danger and defend themselves against it. The Kremlin is investing in several political projects to get its people into the next parliament in order to gain control over power in the Republic of Moldova.
To undermine the democratic process, Moscow is deploying an entire arsenal of tools, from bribing voters and cyber attacks to large-scale information campaigns and paid rallies. The funding, of course, is being provided covertly, including through cryptocurrencies. According to Maia Sandu, about 100 million euros have been allocated for this. The aggressor country also plans to activate tried-and-true influence mechanisms in strategically sensitive regions such as Gagauzia and Transnistria. They will also mobilize the Moldovan diaspora abroad, whose turnout played a decisive role in last year's presidential elections and the referendum on European integration.
Russia has never left us alone, and since the 1990s they have regularly interfered in our elections in one way or another. The difference now, of course, is the scale. Now, the interference is many times, perhaps by orders of magnitude, more intense, much more money is being spent, and their methods have become much more cunning. Now, they don't just need some pro-Russian force, as was the case before. Now, even some so-called pro-Europeans are playing on their side, and we actually know who they really are. And in this complicated and cunning way, they are now trying to change the balance of power in the Republic of Moldova.
The Russians also act through a chain of puppets and proxy structures. At the center of the scheme is the fugitive oligarch Ilan Shor, who was convicted in Moldova for multi-million-dollar embezzlement, but is actively involved in undermining the country from abroad. According to Chisinau, he is the main channel for funding pro-Russian projects, from bribing voters to organizing rallies staged for Russian media coverage.
Today, Europe is run by amateurs and...
One such project is the Victory Bloc, which was denied registration by the Central Election Commission due to violations related to Shor. This sparked a strong reaction in Moscow, where they immediately started talking about the oppression of the opposition and Western interference.
The PAS party, Maia Sandu's party, has already begun taking appropriate steps to mobilize the maximum possible number of voters.
But we understand that Moscow's true goal is not fair elections, but revenge. The Kremlin is trying to split Moldovan society along language, geography, and religion. A familiar scenario.
If we had a common border with Russia, this would have happened a long time ago, and it is unlikely that anything could have saved us here. But for now, what saves us is that Ukraine stands between us holding strong and the Odessa region, which Putin has long been eyeing it, but it has not surrendered. And we know that the enemy was driven out from near Mykolaiv, from near Kherson, and from Kherson itself as well. So right now, they are quite far from us. The reserves they have here in the so-called Transnistria, the uncontrolled regions of the Republic of Moldova, are not enough to do anything serious. Yes, there could be some local provocations, but even that I highly doubt, because Kyiv has repeatedly made it clear, just say the word. The official authorities of Kyiv and Chisinau have said, just let us know and we'll resolve this issue in a matter of days. In other words, that territory would be completely liberated. Our authorities do not want this. They don't want any real combat confrontation here, so they haven't given Kyiv such permission, but nevertheless, this approach has worked.
Time goes by, but the aggressor country's playbook doesn't change. Absolutely everything is being used. Essentially, we are talking about a hybrid war where money, disinformation, and distrust become weapons, and where the goal is not only to influence the outcome, but also to destroy people's faith in the democratic process itself. All of this is happening as Moldova is on the verge of starting negotiations to join the EU. The Kremlin understands the September elections are the last chance to bring Moldova back into its orbit. This means the struggle will be fierce, and its outcome will determine whether the country becomes part of a European future or once again falls under the shadow of Russian influence.
Urgent! Attack on NATO. A Russian drone spotted in Lithuania. It likely entered the country from neighboring Belarus. Could this be a direct incursion? Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Armed Forces launched a counterattack. The liberation of the Sumy region has begun. You have to see this footage. Full details coming up.
On the morning of July 28th, residents of Vilnius woke up to a police report about a drone that had flown from Belarus into Lithuanian territory.
It could have been either a Gerand 2 or accordingly a Gerbera drone. In my opinion, it appears to be a provocation on the Russian side, involving the use of a Gerbera drone.
By the way, this is not the first time military drones have crossed into Lithuania's borders. At first, officials suspected that it was a Shahed drone, which Russia uses in the war against Ukraine. However, it was later revealed that it was a Russian Gerbera drone that crossed into Lithuania, which visually resembles the Shahed and is designed to deceive air defense systems.
This is clearly a provocation, primarily on the part of the Russian Federation. And it's no coincidence that the launch site is said to be the territory of the Republic of Belarus. In other words, this is how the Russian Federation is trying to escalate tensions at the borders with NATO countries. And once again, they are making it clear that a possible scenario for joint Russian-Belarusian exercises on the territory of the Republic of Belarus is precisely the potential implementation of the so-called Suwałki corridor.
It seems that very soon there will be even more drones in Russia. American analysts have published satellite images showing that the occupying country is expanding a drone manufacturing plant in Alabuga. The images show dozens of new buildings, including new dormitories and production facilities. Journalists have calculated that the facilities will be able to accommodate about 40,000 workers, which will help significantly increase production. But where the Russians are really struggling at the border is in the Sumy region. It has become known that Ukrainian Defense Forces have officially liberated the village of Kondratievka in the Sumy region.
Ukrainian Defense Forces on the Sumy front have seized the tactical initiative. The plans of the Russian political leadership to create a so-called buffer zone with an advanced depth of 10 to 20 kilometers have failed. Moreover, after a series of successful counterattacks by the Ukrainian Defense Forces, including the deoccupation of Kondrativka, the deoccupation of Andriivka, and the successful conduct of military operations in the Yunakivka area, there is evidence that the conditions have been created to push Russian occupation forces out of the territory of the Sumy region.
Recently, the Russians have somewhat increased their use of armored vehicles against Ukrainian positions, and since the beginning of July 2025, they have carried out a series of smaller mechanized assaults at the platoon level in the Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, analysts from the Institute for the Study of War note.
This indicates a sense of urgency within the Russian military and political command. Let me remind you, this is about the so-called 60 days of the Russian offensive. Information about the latest Russian deadlines, I remind you, appeared in Western media after the conversation between the American president and the Russian dictator. Moreover, according to Western media, it was Putin himself who named 60 days as the deadline for reaching the administrative borders of the Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions, which have been incorporated into the Russian Federation by decree of the Russian dictator. The documented use of heavy armored vehicles, particularly during the recent assault near Siversk, is a vivid indication that the occupiers are well aware that they have catastrophically little time left to improve their tactical position on the front.
Russian dictator Vladimir Putin stated that 2 out of the 5 divisions which have been planned since December 2022 will be created this year. As a result, the strike power and combat capabilities of the fleet will significantly increase, Putin reports.
Putin's statement is yet another admission. an admission of the inability of the regular units of the Russian Federation's ground forces to actually influence the nature of combat operations on the territory of our country. At present, the ground forces units are mainly used for so-called banzai attacks or meat assaults.
North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un has decided to help his friend Putin. Therefore, Pyongyang may send additional troops to Russia as early as August 2025. In exchange for strengthening the Russian army, North Korea receives satellite launch and missile guidance technologies from Moscow.
Russia is in flames. The fire can be seen from orbit. The Ukrainian Armed Forces can strike anywhere. Shock. As of 2025, there are no peaceful regions left in Russia. Ukrainian drones are capable of and will strike military targets throughout the entire territory of Russia. Life for Russians has turned into a nightmare. Hell for the Kremlin. Watch right now for the hottest strikes of recent days.
This is the resort city of Sochi. For the first time since the start of the full-scale war, Ukrainian drones resembling the Lyut UAV have added something rather specific to the tourist package. But it seems that Russian vacationers didn't like it very much, and the local residents liked it even less.
Why are they bombing Sochi? Aren't they supposed to be bombing Russia?
Wait, isn't Sochi part of Russia? This question has already become a meme, just like the next one. Where is the Russian air defense?
They've already run out of missiles. Maybe the missiles really have run out? It's already a mess in that one spot.
And it's even worse where the air defense is actually working. They fired at a drone so recklessly that they ended up hitting a residential building with their own S-400 missile. The main target of the Ukrainian attack was the oil depot at Sochi International Airport. Thousands of cancelled flights at Russian airports were compounded by a new transportation collapse. Drones have pinpointed key railway junctions vital to the occupying army. These are the logistical arteries that feed Russia's war machine. If these are cut, supplies to the front come to a halt. Through Kamny, the full name is Kamenolomny Station, the Russian army transfers equipment, weapons, fuel, and soldiers to the front. High-quality drones destroyed not only the station building itself, but also the control room and the networks. As a result, nearly 150 trains did not arrive at their destinations on time, which undermines their offensive. And this is another station, Likaya. In fact, trouble has plagued it since the days of the ATO. Essentially, a significant part of the supply for the Donetsk and Luhansk fronts comes from here. Our defenders also attacked the railway logistics hub in Novocherkassk. Last night, a substation exploded in the Volgograd region, which supplies power to the railway in the Oktyabrski district. Civilian air traffic is being blocked by drones. We are actively attacking the railways. There are also changes happening in Russia's ports. Starting this week, all foreign vessels there have been ordered to be inspected by FSB officers, which adds more problems to the Russian military economy. We continue the painful tactic of 100 cuts for the enemy. It was our forces using two types of drones at once, these mini Shaheds and these tailed UAVs, that struck the signal radio factory in Stavropol, which is under sanctions. It is a key facility for electronic warfare systems in aviation and air defense, as well as for weapon guidance systems. And this is how the nitrogen plant in the Stavropol region was burning, a producer of raw materials for explosives, specifically nitric acid and ammonium nitrate. Drones also paid a visit to the Tambov gunpowder plant. Here, the Russians produce gunpowder both for small arms and for rockets. A series of powerful explosions thundered in occupied Donetsk and Makivka. There was a powerful strike in the area of the Zasyadko mine. At least 8 hits targeted the occupiers' base and the railway infrastructure. Ammunition was burning near occupied Melitopol. This week, our military intelligence reported in. At the Armavir airfield in Krasnodar Krai, a Su-27 combat trainer caught fire. They hinted that it was the work of partisans. And this is not the end yet.
Urgent! The front is paralyzed. Starlink is down. Reports began to appear online about catastrophic problems with Starlink terminals. In particular, large-scale outages are being observed on the front lines in Ukraine. Is this betrayal or a hacker attack? Watch this.
The front has been left without communication. Starlinks are not working. the Russians admitted that Pokrovsk couldn't be taken and began an offensive on a neighboring city. A new regiment of Kadyrovites is being prepared to be sent to Zaporizhzhia, but even across the border, no one believes in the success of Russia's summer offensive anymore. What is life like on the front today? Watch right now. More than 2 hours without communication at the positions, no data transmission from reconnaissance drones, and no understanding of what is happening at neighboring positions. Last night, Starlink stopped working en masse on the front lines.
It turns out the entire military system is paralyzed. And this particular unit simply doesn't understand what it should do, doesn't know what's happening in the neighboring unit. There are no orders to advance, nor to retreat, nor to attack. There is no information at all. In short, they suddenly find themselves in an information vacuum.
Fortunately, the vacuum didn't last long. 2.5 hours later, the satellites picked up the signal again. It turned out that it wasn't even Russian sabotage, but a system failure worldwide. It is reported that the outage did not affect the situation on the front line. No changes either in the hottest spot of this war today, Pokrovsk. A city battered, weary, but unbroken. Having recently cleared out Russian saboteurs here, the Ukrainian Armed Forces made it clear that any assaults on these positions would cost Russia thousands of casualties. And it seems they've gotten the message. Along with the endless shelling of Pokrovsk, it was decided to intensify assault operations on the neighboring city of Kostiantynivka.
Kostiantynivka is not just another random town in Donetsk region, but one of the main focal points of the enemy's efforts. After all, according to the invaders, its role as a logistical hub makes it the key not only to Pokrovsk, but to all the cities in western Donetsk region, such as Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and Chasiv Yar.
At the same time, the former commander-in-chief and now Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, Valery Zaluzhny, gave his own forecast on how long such assaults might continue and when the war as a whole could end. Unfortunately, the forecasts are not encouraging.
If we only try to achieve a mere ceasefire without adequately building up our own robust defenses for the future, then this protracted conflict will undoubtedly drag on for a very, very long time. And having originally started in 2014, God willing, it might only finally come to an end in 2034.
At the same time, analysts clarify that when Zaluzhny mentions such timeframes, he is taking into account Russia's current economic situation, the present level of support from partners and, in particular, from the United States. And he is by no means talking about the same level of war intensity as we see today for the entire period.
Of course, the intensity of these hostilities can certainly change. It can significantly decrease. It can even drop completely to zero under certain specific ceasefire conditions. And it can also rise again quite dramatically, potentially becoming very high indeed. The war can take on a hybrid character. All of this is true. But that's only under one crucial condition: if Russia truly remains a unified and stable state, because the significant prospect of Russia potentially collapsing as a direct result of certain internal processes and significant failures at the front lines does indeed exist.
We should also not forget that Russia's resources are not unlimited, and as it turns out, neither are its human resources. Losing 1,000 soldiers a day, the Russian General Staff has fought itself into a position where, for the first time in the past 2 years, Putin is once again forced to ask Kadyrov for help. At the very least, the latest regiment of reservists was recruited specifically in Chechnya.
Again, regarding who was recruited into this regiment, which, in my opinion, may well become a certain reserve reinforcement for enemy attacks, particularly in the Zaporizhzhia direction. That's quite possible. As for how effective it will be, I think we'll find out soon enough. If this regiment actually gets involved in combat operations, and not just in filming yet another TikTok series.
But even that is not enough for what the bunker dweller has in mind. Analysts are convinced. The demand for 4 Ukrainian regions is far from matching what Russia is showing on the battlefield. Through inhuman efforts, the defense forces managed to hold back Putin's mercenaries, and their inability to capture even Pokrovsk for over a year is a vivid confirmation of that.
Putin doesn't have the reserves or resources for this offensive to end in any kind of significant success, apart from a few hundred meters here and there, or some isolated village that they managed to capture. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine are also liberating, so to speak, a few hundred meters here and there, and some village as well. That's how it will continue until the end of summer. This will be the result of Putin's much-hyped summer offensive.
Obviously, they understand this in Russia as well, which is why they're trying to delay as much as possible the moment when concrete decisions will finally have to be made. So, as it became known, the Russian delegation in Istanbul proposed to create not just one, but 3 negotiation groups at once, and to replace a ceasefire with short truces in order to collect the wounded and the dead. In short, yet another sham in the best Moscow traditions.
It's obvious that, having secured such a pause, such a break on the front as a bonus, the Russians will use it to strengthen themselves. What does this mean for us in the end? It ends with us losing positions, that is, our territories, and it results in losses of our killed and wounded. I think Ukraine cannot afford to step on the same rake again and repeat the same mistake.
Fortunately, this trick didn't work even for the main viewer across the ocean, Donald Trump. The states made it clear that pretending there is peace is not an option, either real silence on the front or sanctions. There are 40 days left until the end of Trump's ultimatum to Putin.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The enemy is in Pokrovsk. The first group has been eliminated. Shock! Enemy saboteurs have infiltrated Pokrovsk. The problem is that the Ukrainian Armed Forces are critically short of infantry in the Pokrovsk area. That's exactly why the enemy was able to get in. Can robots replace people to hold the front line and save the situation? Watch.
A Russian FPV drone is sitting on the road waiting for its prey, a Ukrainian vehicle. Our soldiers call such traps by the Russian word zhdun. Fortunately, the zhdun was spotted by a Ukrainian drone. One drone destroys another. The war of robots is already a reality. This is a typical situation for the defenders in the Pokrovsk area, where the enemy is trying to create an impassable kill zone and cut off logistics.
They're hitting our logistics incredibly hard.
The enemy has advanced to the center of the village of Novoekonomishne, northeast of Mirnorad. This means that the logistics corridor along the Kostiantinivka-Pokrovsk highway has already been lost. There are only 2 roads left to the strategically important city, one from the direction of Pavlohrad and another through the village of Rodinska. But both are under constant artillery fire and drone strikes. Fire! The 59th Brigade is holding the defense in the Pokrovsk area. This unit of the Unmanned Systems Forces also has its own assault infantry. Sometimes only ground drones are able to reach the positions there.
The enemy has cut off our logistics in this sector. Right now, it's also very difficult to get in with armored personnel carriers or pickups. In our sector, robotic systems are the top priority.
Back at the beginning of the year, the Da Vinci Wolves Battalion, which became part of the 59th, realized that ground robots allow people to survive in places where survival would seem impossible. This is how a wheeled drone delivers food, ammunition, and medical supplies to the guys, literally right under the enemy's nose. Because the Russians are, without exaggeration, sitting in the neighboring house. Now the battalion has an entire arsenal of unmanned vehicles for different tasks.
Its payload capacity is from 400 kilograms. It can operate several times in one night.
The main tasks are logistics and evacuation of the wounded.
To extract a single wounded person, you need at least 4 people. But with the robot, the job becomes easier. It makes things easier because you don't need 4 people. This already guarantees safety for the people. Another advantage is that it works faster than a group of people.
Drones are also used to evacuate the dead. Here is one such mission. A group of assault troops requests the evacuation of the body of a hero who died on the front line. The Termit drone is trying to retrieve him. During the evacuation, several enemy FPV drones target the ground drone. The robot withstands the hits. If the fallen soldier's comrades had tried to carry out his body, there would have been even more casualties. This guy, an NRC operator, had his own drone save his life during a logistics operation.
You could say the Termit bought me my life. A Russian FPV attack starts against us. I see an FPV drone, it's flying straight at me. They're already shouting at me, "Run!" And I hear the FPV stop before landing, turn around and fly toward the Termit.
The operator whose robot shielded him is only 21 years old.
My advantage is UAVs and strike ground robotic systems.
Strike ground robotic systems operating here, specifically in the Pokrovsk area, have successfully stopped several significant assaults.
At that moment, the enemy was carrying out assault operations, and in fact, they were successful. We were engaging the enemy from a nearby grove. Our task was to destroy the enemy. During our, let's say, shift at this position, we killed 4 sappers. Specifically from the turret. We took down 2 of them right away, pinned 2 others to the ground, and then hit them with an FPV drone.
And this is a kamikaze platform. Usually, it delivers an anti-tank mine one way. An experienced operator can easily drive such a machine straight into the enemy's shelter. Now here we go. Detonation. But machines like these haven't become a mass weapon yet. The main task for ground-based unmanned systems is logistics. But hoping that robots are holding the front line near Pokrovsk due to a shortage of people is wishful thinking.
Let me be honest with you. At this stage, logistics is like a joint, essential for the front line. At the moment, it can't hold a section or somehow reinforce it.
Here near Pokrovsk, the war is changing very quickly. Drones that were highly effective just yesterday suddenly lose their operational relevance today. This primarily concerns aerial reconnaissance drones, says the deputy commander of the 59th Brigade.
For me, this tool works well, but for the neighboring unit, say 3 brigades over, it doesn't work at all.
Why?
Technical conditions, radio frequencies, where the enemy is. Well, for example, right now we have a situation where certain frequencies are working. On another section of the front, they might not work.
What to do is a critical question, especially when sometimes only drones can stop the enemy. The deputy brigade commander's solution is simple. Those who know their section of the front should be allowed to purchase drones themselves.
Decentralization. In other words, a military unit should have the right, have discretionary funds, and be able to say, we are ready to take responsibility for a specific piece of equipment.
In addition, the brigade command officer believes that this would also create a chance to reduce the unjustifiably high financial appetites of some manufacturers and therefore increase the number of drones.
The 10th FPV, yes, the 10th frame.
This is actually
exactly the same, just the 10th one with a 10-kilometer spool on it. For example, one manufacturer sells it for 48 or 47, while another sells it for 30. It's exactly the same thing. I don't even know what could justify artificially raising the price like that. What for? Some kind of technical solution? No, they're identical.
From a financial standpoint, this looks like profiteering during wartime. In other words, people are profiting and taking advantage of the war without really thinking about the outcome, about victory, or about the limitations of our resources.
The defense of Pokrovsk shows that a turning point is coming in the war. To withstand it, both those holding the front and those supplying ammunition need to adapt quickly.
Brutal! The Russians were caught red-handed. New schemes for stealing the Ukrainian harvest. Another attempt by the Russians to profit from the theft of Ukraine's resources. They have been stealing your grain since the first year of the war, and 2025 was no exception. What is this about, and what new schemes has the Kremlin come up with? All the details coming up. Russia continues to show its true colors. With each passing day, more and more evidence emerges that for the Kremlin, war is not just about killings, torture, and occupation. It's a business, bloody, cynical, and meticulously planned.
We don't need anything that belongs to others.
Under the cover of rocket fire and slogans about protecting Russian speakers, Moscow has set up a large-scale looting operation. One of its most profitable lines is the theft of Ukrainian grain. The Russians export harvests from temporarily occupied territories, relabel them as their own, and sell them abroad. According to various estimates, during the full-scale war alone, Russia may have exported between 10 and 15 million tons of wheat from temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories. The total value of these thefts is estimated at $6.4 billion. For comparison, the entire wheat harvest in Romania, one of the largest agricultural countries in the EU, amounted to only 9 million tons in 2022. Ukrainian journalists have obtained unique documents, including materials from the hacked email of one of the Russian companies involved in the export of agricultural products. This data confirmed that Ukrainian grain, stolen from the occupied territories, is being sold on the international market under the guise of being Russian. The key hub of this scheme became the Berdyansk Sea commercial port, which was seized by the aggressor country. According to the documents, in 2023-2024, the company was engaged in transshipping grain and oilseeds, which were then sent to the ports of Temryuk, Kavkaz, and Kerch. From this alone, the company earned more than 168 million rubles. Grain is exported not only under the cover of fictitious state operators, but also through shell companies like Crystal 2019, which until recently had not conducted any business activity at all. These entities are created specifically to complicate the supply chain, conceal the origin of the harvest, and legalize it on the global market. You can now see on the screen a list of ships and their crew members who are stealing Ukrainian grain.
This investigation is most likely just the tip of the iceberg. Based on the analysis of the provided materials and the overall context of how logistics schemes operate in the temporarily occupied territories, it can be assumed that the transportation of grain from these waters to the ports of Kavkaz and Temryuk is not an isolated incident, but part of a large-scale systematic operation.
Sometimes the route is disguised so crudely that it even raises suspicions among the perpetrators themselves. One example is the vessel Kapitan Yakovlev, which was initially listed as heading to Cyprus in the official documents, but in the next bill of lading, its destination was changed to Temryuk. Interestingly, in Temryuk, the Russians didn't even load the vessel. The amount of wheat remained the same. There are also specific individuals in this story who are profiting from this scheme. One such company is Agrotema, which is registered in Russia, but actively works with grain exported from the occupied territories. The company was not established after the invasion began, but back in 2014, at the very start of the annexation of Crimea and the beginning of the war in Donbass. Since then, its revenues have grown steadily, and after 2022, they skyrocketed by 100% in 2022 and by 355% in 2023. All of this company's shipments go through the port of Temryuk, and its owner, Temukwev Kerim Kaisinovich, is directly connected to the collaborator Yevgeny Balitsky, who was appointed by the Kremlin to govern the occupied part of the Zaporizhzhia region. And now comes the most interesting part. This scheme could not work without those who are willing to buy this grain. Among the regular clients are Turkish and Israeli companies. Here, for example, is a contract for the supply of grain from Agrotema to Turkey. The vessel Pola Varvara, which has already been sanctioned by the US for participating in energy projects. It is now confirmed that it is also involved in the grain theft scheme. Another example is a shipment to Israel. The contract was signed between Agrotema and the Israeli branch of the American corporation ADM. The port of departure is Temryuk, the port of destination is Haifa, and the vessel is Petrotrans 5901. Interestingly, its sister ship, Petrotrans 5902, is already under US sanctions. But this particular vessel is still not on the list. Even though both are connected to the company DTLK and its director, Evgeny Ditrik.
ADM. This company also purchases grain in Ukraine and has a representative office here. We reached out to ADM offices both in the US and in Israel. Only the former provided us with a response. Although our inquiry pointed out changes in revenue statistics and a connection to the Gauleiter of the Zaporizhzhia region, Evgeny Balitsky, the representatives replied that they have no grounds to consider the grain stolen from Crimea, given the company's internal verification program. As for why the temporarily occupied peninsula is specifically involved here, we cannot say for certain. We can only assume that the company does not distinguish between the temporarily occupied part of the Zaporizhzhia region and Crimea.
3 key companies are responsible for the logistics of the stolen grain. The flagship is Victoria Katran. All 3 are interconnected and registered to a single individual, Larisa Viktorovna Frolova. However, in reality, all operations are overseen by her ex-husband, Gia Georgievich Kvichidze, the owner of the agro company Eurotrust. One this time. The financial reports show that after the invasion, his business literally skyrocketed. In 2023, net profit increased almost 9-fold, by 897%. He essentially coordinates the activities of this entire group. According to data obtained from the hacked email, the following ships are actively involved in exporting Ukrainian grain. You can see their list on the screen right now. These are not just ships, they are floating evidence. Every route, every shipment is a trace of the crime that can still be tracked. The theft of Ukrainian grain is not just stealing, it's part of a hybrid war. First, Russia destroys Ukrainian fields, then it takes away the harvest and then sells it abroad, turning blood and suffering into profit. But Russia does not do this alone. Without intermediaries, agents, carriers, logisticians, and international buyers, this scheme would be impossible. That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode. To watch the full video, follow the link in our profile to our YouTube channel and subscribe to always stay up to date with the most important news.